Konnichiwa everyone. There is nothing quite like the sultry sound of rain to get your brain going on a day like today. Alright, so this rain has got my brain gears kind of going in a certain direction, and I'm not quite sure exactly what I want to do, but the overall thought I'm thinking with this is there's a instrument in Japan called a shamisen. So shamisen is actually pretty cool. It's a 3-string sort of banjo-ish instrument. This is going to not do a lot of justice because these things are actually really beautiful. But you basically have 3 strings, comes across, and it's stretched over a skin head down here. Little tailpiece and all that. They're actually pretty simple instruments, and I always thought they sounded really cool. I like the music that's associated with them. So I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to apply it to an electric bass. Now, I don't have enough tuning machines to actually do 3 strings, so we're just going to do 2. I really have a hard time doing layouts with these kind of things and, like, you know, prototyping it on paper, so I think we're just going to kind of build it and then see what happens. But needing to find a use for all this scrap wood I've got laying around for a long time, so I think this might be it. So with that in mind, I'm going to finish my coffee here. So I've never tried anything like this before, but you know what? Here's to adventure. Alright, this is what we're going to cut our neck stock from. Just some really nice mahogany. It's been kicking around for a while. Haven't had much use for it up till now, but we're going to ripsaw it on this one side here. I've already got it laid out. This stuff is actually pretty cool. Nice and beautiful, some nice figure on that, so it ought to be nice once we get it cut down. It's interesting to note that most of the time I spend my time making rip cuts, so maybe I ought to make a living doing that. Alright, so hopefully you can see where that transition happens on this here. Just got the square section. This is actually going to be covered up by the body and it'll be glued in place. Then the rest of this will be the actual, you know, neck fingerboard kind of thing. Now, a lot of instruments have what's called a truss rod in them, but I don't really want to use a truss rod because I'm trying to keep this thing pretty light and pretty fluffy. If you didn't know, let me explain it real quick. A truss rod basically is a metal rod that it's attached to the neck, runs the full length of the neck. It's usually under the fingerboard here. And when you tighten up the nut, it actually causes the neck to rise this way, or you can flatten it out and have it flatten out this way. All that does is it keeps the instrument playable, keeps it in good shape, and keeps the neck from being too curved from the tension of the strings as time goes on. So rather than use a truss rod, we're going to use some really cool material called carbon fiber. Yes, carbon fiber is a really fantastic thing. We're going to actually inlay a single rod running from one end of the neck all the way down to the other end. And we're going to do it while I've got it square here because it's really tough to cut channels on curved material. It's just going to keep the neck pretty straight over the years, hopefully keep it from bowing up too much as time goes on. So let's get at it. Alright, no turning back now. Let's get this guy glued in and hope for the best. Alright, that went about as well as expected. But yeah, that, ladies and gentlemen, is our inlaid neck. Then I'll let that sit for a good long while and then we'll check on it a little bit later. But now we can get started on the next bit, and that is the body of this thing. So hopefully you can see what we're going for here with the Swiss cheese kind of approach. Just kind of hogging out a good bit of material here. Then we'll go back through with a chisel and we'll clear it all up. There'll be a little bit of work involved, but once it's done, this is honestly the hardest part of this whole thing. And Swiss cheesing is a pretty quick and efficient way to get rid of a lot of material without having to sit there for hours at a time just tapping away and hammering away. So just to give you a rough idea of what we're shooting for here, got my fingerboard laid out on our neck blank there, as well as the body cut out. So that's the overall kind of size of this thing. Anyway, next order of business is to get this fingerboard glued to this neck. That's going to be kind of fun, but we're going to get it glued to it. Hopefully that carbon will keep it nice and straight. Then we're going to cut a little bit of a recess here for the neck, and then we're going to cut the neck down to size. And once this is glued up, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape overall. So like I said before, I haven't really tried this to this extent before, but there's always a first time for everything, and you got to push yourself a good bit in order to push your skills a little farther. So here's to adventure. Some good little helping of this, and we'll see what we can get. Come on. All right, getting some good squeeze out both ends. Let's put a couple more clamps on here just for good measure. All right, that I would say was at the minimum a marginally successful, well, success. All right, so that's gonna sit for a good long while. Pretty happy with how that turned out. A little bit of glue, a little bit of time, and that ought to be all we need. We are making some good progress. So sometime later, after our glue is dried, our fingerboard is securely attached to our neck here. I'm kind of happy with that. I'm going to cut off the extension here at some point, but I'm using it to determine the scale length. Anyway, we're going to get this thing cut down to size. The last bit that we got to do on this is we have to add a bit of an extension up here. Now I have here a nice little piece of figured maple, and what we're going to do with this is we're actually, instead of leaving this flat, we're going to cut a slight bit of relief this way, so I'm only going to take it on either side of the carbon fiber right here. And once we do that, we're going to create a little bit of a break angle so that when our strings stop up here, instead of going straight across, it goes down into the tuning machines. But I'm going to leave a little bit of a space right here, just so that we can have a nut right here. And you're going to add that to it. It's just going to be glued, nothing complicated, but just a slight bit of an angle there. All right, I got my OSHA approved flip-flops on for this. Alright, so we've been fitting this up for a good little while now, and it fits like a glove. Let's hope that this works. Alright, I'm going to let that sit, fully dry out and fully cure before we do anything else to it, but we have done all we can do at this point. Alright, so while our headstock is drying here, we're going to make the most of our time, and we're going to cut the mortise section for the tenon of the neck right here. So I've got this marked out. It's not going to be that deep into the body. We've got quite a big chunk of wood to deal with here. But we're just going to cut a bit of a mortise right here where this crack is, kind of take advantage of the wood. But it needs to be fairly tight. I mean, you can kind of get away with some little bit of looseness there, but it just needs to be pretty tight and pretty straight in with the body here. Let's get at that and get that done. Making more progress, and progress is good. Alright, so it's going pretty slow, so I figured rather than sit here all day and chip away at it with this little guy, we're going to get the trucker out and we're going to get some stuff done. Just for size reference, this thing is huge. I love it. Let's see what we can do with this. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. All right, another test fit in the books. Check that out. Thing's holding itself in there nicely. Means it's a good tight fit. It's almost dry, but that is looking cool. So before we can get our neck glued onto this thing, we got to do one more thing, and that is we've got to add the top. This is actually just a really thin piece of spruce. It's about 125 thousandths thick. Pretty thin, flexible, but very strong stuff. And what we're going to do with it is we are going to glue it to the top of this guy here, right about there. The reason we're going to do that is because on our recess that we've cut back here, we're actually going to attach our pickup to the top of this along lamp, and we're going to laminate it with a small little piece of maple or something similar. And what that's basically going to do is give us an acoustic, solid body electric bass. And this is the entire concept of this thing. You know, this is going to be the heart and soul of it. So I'm going to glue this to the top, let it get set in place and let the glue dry. And then we're going to actually attach the neck to it. Hopefully I can get this all lined up correctly. Alright, so this is dry enough. I think we're going to go ahead and start shaping this neck down while we're waiting for the top to dry. I'm going to use the little compass plane that we restored before, if you recall this earlier from on the channel, but yeah, let's get at it. Alright, so after much carving, much filing, and a lot of work, I have got the profile down to where I'm very happy with it. Got a nice little spoon shape right there. I need to make a curved card scraper to do the final finish on this. Now I have a card scraper here, but this is like the flat kind of cabinet scraper type. And if you use this, you tend to get lots of little straight lines in your neck, which really isn't ideal. It kind of feels weird, it's kind of bumpy. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this guy, and we're going to also take this guy. Yeah, this is my little Dumore hand grinder. I think this is actually supposed to be a tool post grinder, but I use it for other things anyway. I use this for my day job pretty much on a daily basis. You know, that's why it's a day job. But this thing is awesome, and we're going to use it to cut kind of a little bit of a curved radius in this thing. It's not going to be too extreme, just enough so that we can get a final finish on this neck without having any sort of weird divots and little pockets in it and that kind of thing. So anyway, this thing's going to work just fine to make the tool that we need for our needs. And of course the prerequisite safety glove and the prerequisite safety glasses. And a wise man once told me, safety, what's that? Alright, let's check that out, see what we got. Kind of see what I was going for on that. Just something that isn't so squared off so we can kind of get around the corners there on this, but that ought to work just fine. So I went a little bit further with the scraper there just to get a nice profile, so I'm just going to finish out this neck and then we're going to move on to some other stuff. But you know, one of the greatest things about having some tools that you can make other tools with is you can make stuff like this. I had nothing to make this with before except the grinder, and turned out pretty good. Let's see how it does. Oh yeah, this thing is nice and smooth. Just rounding off all those corners there to get a nice consistent finish. That's all we're really after. Alright, so check out that nice finish we got on that. All from a little shop-made tool. A wise man once told me, if you can't be intelligent, you can at least be resourceful. Alright, a quick dusting of sanding, and our neck is actually pretty much done. I'm very happy with that. This little cover here was actually to cover up where the carbon fiber was extending into the neck here. And it looks kind of cool. It's a little bit of a added panache thing there. Panache? Is it panache or panache? If you know, answer in the comments down below. Alright, so I got our shellac sitting in some nice denatured alcohol that's going to dissolve nicely. So I'm thinking about possibly doing the whole thing in shellac. I might need a little bit more than this, but you know, I like really light natural finishes, so this ought to work just fine, I think. But while that's dissolving, we're going to work on another part of the project. That is making the bridge. Now, typically violin and cello bridges are made with maple, and I've got this nice little piece of figured maple here. I don't have anything with like perfect grain, so this will just kind of have to do. All I'm really thinking for this is just having a simple little arch shape. I've already measured this out on the body. So we're going to cut this across here, and then we're going to trim it back to where I get just outside of that line there. But this should look pretty cool. This is some pretty highly figured stuff, so I'm also going to sand this just to make it a little bit more consistent with the neck. But yeah, it should work fine. Hopefully it'll hold up under the tension of the strings over the long term, but if not, you can always make another one. Alright, so a lot of carving and scraping and planing later. I'm just keeping the design pretty simple, no crazy little fancy inlays or scroll work or anything like that, just a nice little chunk of figured maple there. So I'm not sure how long this is going to last in the many years down the road, but we'll find out, I'm sure. So after we've got all that maple done, our shellac is nice and dissolved. This is not going to be an ideal situation for this. I just have paper towels to apply this stuff with, but it's I think it's going to work. We're just going to use the dust of the mahogany that we made with the sandpaper to fill the pores. And what I'm hoping will happen is the shellac will kind of hit it and then seal it in there. So without further ado, let's see what happens here. Just going to do a little dab here and a little dab there. The nice thing about shellac is that it dries very quickly, so if you're in a rush, shellac might be the answer to your problem. That actually worked pretty well. I'm pretty happy about that, so I'm going to hit it with a few more coats, but yeah, that is a nice smooth neck on that, and that mahogany looks really cool. I always love the look of a good solid natural finish. I'm not a big fan of dyes and colorants and that kind of thing. Really prefer for the wood to speak for itself. Okay, so we are at the most nerve-wracking and riveting part of this entire project, and that is we are going to permanently mount the neck to the body with glue. Yeah, so here's the good news. The joint is extremely tight because it will hold itself in there absolutely no problem, so I don't think that that's going to be an issue. What I don't want to have happen is to glue it in and have it shift, so we're just going to take a little bit of extra precaution and make sure that doesn't happen. Let's do this. So, wish me luck, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, let's get a little bit on there, just for good measure. Alright, I'm thinking a single clamp ought to be enough, or it could just hold itself with its own tension. Oop, come on. Come on, Bessie. Sweet, it went in without any issue. I'm gonna get a clamp on this thing and I'm gonna leave this for a while. There we go. Alright, we got squeeze out there on the sides. Projection looks to be right about where I want it. So we're going to have to get this tailpiece made, and I'm kind of apprehensive to drill it by hand because previously I tried it on this piece and it straight up split. So I've been testing this on a new little tool I've got. We're going to try this on my wonderful new old vintage Dumore high-speed precision drill press. These are actually really cool. If you're not familiar with these, you can do some research online, but the table actually moves up. So for you guys who are mechanically inclined, that might be kind of cool to you. We're going to get this done. This is not an ideal press for wood because it's very, very fast. I think the top speed on this is 17,000 RPM, so that'll set this thing on fire right quick. So I'm not too worried about the string holes because we're going to make those a little bit bigger anyway, but if you can imagine, we're going to have a post hole here. Screw's going to go through this, mount into the body. String 1, string 2, really easy, really quick and simple. So I'm gonna try this. Now this thing has a foot pedal on the floor, so once we fire this up, you got nothing, but once you engage the foot pedal, pretty fast, like a little jet engine. And one other thing before we get to this, ladies and gentlemen, is Wilbert. Wilbert is my new shop buddy. Just thought you guys might want to become acquainted with him. A little off center, but not by much. Actually, that was pretty good. Alright, let's see how this guy can fit. Oh yeah, that's going to work just fine, I think. Got a little trim down later. It's a lot nicer and a lot smaller. Let's see what it looks like when mounted. I got a feeling we're going to be sitting pretty. That is much nicer than it was before. While the neck glue is still drying, I figured we'd go ahead and get the rest of this shellacked up. A couple of coats of that, and it's looking pretty good. And once that neck dries out completely, we're going to make a nut for this. I'm going to cut the bridge down to size, and then we're going to string this baby up. But yeah, that is looking really cool. A little ugly, but you know, I am pretty happy with how it's turned out so far. Even if it's not a complete success, I learned quite a bit in this entire process. So let's see what happens as soon as it's cured up and as soon as I get strings. Here's to adventure, right? So one last thing we do before we make the nut and the final setup on this thing. I'm going to condition this fingerboard with a little bit of lemon oil. The lemon oil should do a pretty good job of keeping this board protected, keeping it from drying out, but I'm kind of happy with how that looks already. It's kind of pretty overall. Yeah, that Jatoba is pretty good looking stuff. So we're going to let that soak in for a while, and then we're going to get to making the final parts of this. But ladies and gentlemen, we almost have a completed project here. So good news is we got the strings on, and the strings actually do work. I've got a little bit more work to do to the bridge. And I'm going to go ahead and attach the armrest here, and this is just going to give a little bit of added balance to the side here. This thing's pretty narrow, so anything I can add to make it more comfortable for the player is a bonus. Alright, just press fit it in just slightly. Alright, there we go. So check that out. That actually keeps your hand floating free of the base when you're playing, gives you a little bit more leverage to get down to those strings. Now all I got to do is get this thing scraped down. And we're going to do a little bit of work to the bridge too while we're waiting for this glue to dry. The electronics are also installed. Just on the last little leg here, and that's to get this thing tuned up. And then we're going to see what she sounds like. Oh, that's a good sign. And just in case you were wondering what I was using for electronics in this is actually a acoustic guitar pickup. It's really just 3 contact sensors that are mounted directly to a plate that is below the bridge here. So that's where our tone is coming from, and it's being amplified, you know, just like any other electric instrument, but because this is an open space underneath here, it's actually an acoustic cavity, so it's a solid body acoustic bass. But that was the entire concept of this thing. So, without further ado, let's plug it in. Alright, so I've got my junky little amplifier here. Just something teeny tiny to mess around with in the apartment. Mounted this on the bottom side there. Alright, let's hear it. What did I miss with? Oh, wait a minute. The amplifier was off. Oh, yes! It works. That is amazing. Alright, let's very good sound to hear. I'm pretty happy with that. Almost has kind of a cello feel to it. It's got some sustain too. Woohoo! Yeah! That is what I would call a success. I am a very happy person right now. Well, I can honestly say that that was probably one of the most unique and challenging builds I've ever done on the channel here. There are lots and lots of flaws with this thing, but I'm still pretty happy with how it turned out. The only thing I really would like to redo would be the headstock. It really looks like a goofy alien face just kind of taunting me there, but regardless, I'm still very happy that it turned out. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for all your support, especially to the patrons on Patreon. You know who you are. If you guys are interested in that, there's a link in the description box down below. All the patrons get the videos 1 full week before the public release. As always, thank you guys for watching. Have an awesome day. Domo arigato. Jamatane.